What you're about to witness is the beginning of a war that could redraw the map of the Middle East forever. The United States and Israel have just attacked Iran in a military operation of historic scale, and the world will never be the same. If you want to understand what's really happening, stay until the end. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. This morning, February 28th, 2026, the United States and Israel launched a joint military operation against Iran. The Pentagon named the American mission Operation Epic Fury. Israel called theirs Lion's Roar. And we're not talking about a targeted surgical strike. Trump himself, in an 8-minute video posted on Truth Social at 2:30 in the morning, used the words massive and ongoing combat operations. That's not a euphemism. That's war. Explosions were reported in Tehran, Isfahan, Tabriz, Qom, and Kermanshah. Strikes near the compound of Ayatollah Khamenei. Strikes near the headquarters of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. At the same time, air raid sirens blared across Israel, airports were shut down, schools suspended, and the Israeli Ministry of Defense declared a state of emergency. This is what happens when two countries with unprecedented combined firepower coordinate months of planning and decide to execute simultaneously. And the question that must be asked immediately is, how did we get here? Because the answer reveals a great deal about who's in charge and what kind of logic is driving this decision. On Friday, just hours before the first missiles fell, Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi publicly declared that indirect negotiations between Washington and Tehran, mediated by his country, had achieved substantial progress. He said, word for word, "Peace is within our reach." On Saturday morning, he woke up to find bombs falling on the country he had been negotiating with. He said rightfully, "I am dismayed. Active and serious negotiations have once again been destroyed." This sequence must be taken with complete seriousness. There was an ongoing negotiation. There was documented progress. And instead of waiting for a diplomatic outcome, the Trump administration chose military force on a scale not seen in the region since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The nuclear issue that supposedly justifies the action is real. Iran enriched nearly 972 pounds of uranium to 60% purity by mid-June 2025. That puts the country one short step away from weapons-grade material. There is a concrete threat, but how you respond to that threat, through diplomacy or through military force, is a political choice with consequences that will last for decades. And that choice was made without formal authorization from Congress. Republican Congressman Thomas Massie was direct. This is an act of war not authorized by Congress. He is correct under the letter of the law. Iran did not stand still. That needs to be stated clearly, because there's a temptation to frame this story as an American and Israeli action with Iran simply as a passive target. That's not what's happening. The Tehran regime responded immediately, aggressively, and broadly. Ballistic missiles were launched against Israel. Missiles were fired at American military bases in Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, in Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Qatar said it intercepted missiles using its Patriot systems. In the UAE, a migrant worker was killed by shrapnel from an intercepted missile near Abu Dhabi. Explosions were heard from Dubai to Doha. An Iranian official declared that all American and Israeli interests in the region are now legitimate targets. That is not empty rhetoric. Iran spent decades building an asymmetric retaliation capability precisely for a moment like this. What we are witnessing is a regional escalation that far surpasses any previous confrontation between these forces. In the past exchanges between Israel and Iran, including the operation in June 2025, Iran responded in a limited, calculated manner, careful not to provoke an even more devastating response. Now, with the regime under literal existential threat, with bombings near the Ayatollah's residence, with internet access cut off across the country, with Trump himself telling the Iranian people, "Take control of your government. This may be your only chance for generations." Iran has nothing left to lose by using everything it has. And that is precisely the point that the most serious strategists are raising. The Atlantic Council, in an analysis published today, frames the question directly. Trump's bet is that he can inflict enough damage on Iran's political and military institutions to cause the regime to collapse. But what's the plan if it doesn't? What's the plan if the IRGC, with 47 years of experience in political and military survival, decides to use its remaining arsenal while it still can? What is the exit strategy? Trump said the goal of the operation is to destroy their missiles and level the missile industry to the ground and annihilate the Iranian Navy. Those are concrete military objectives, but he also told the Iranian people to take control of the government. That is not a military objective. That is regime change, and regime change is a political mission that no bombing campaign can guarantee. Iraq in 2003 taught that lesson in blood and trillions of dollars. Someone in Washington should remember that. Let's talk about the contradictions at the heart of this policy decision, because they are inseparable from any serious analysis of what is happening. Donald Trump spent years criticizing military interventions in the Middle East. He publicly positioned himself against endless wars. He accused Obama of dragging the United States toward conflict with Iran through policies he considered weak. He promised a foreign policy that prioritized deals over confrontation, and now, on the morning of February 28th, 2026, he signed the order for massive combat operations against Iran without congressional authorization, while a diplomatic negotiation was actively underway and showing real progress. This is not accidental incoherence. It is a deliberate choice, and the American people need to understand the weight of what was decided in their name in the early hours of this morning, without a congressional debate, without a vote, without a published plan for how this ends. The Strait of Hormuz is the corridor through which 1/3 of the world's seaborne oil passes. If Iran or the Houthis in Yemen, who have already signaled a possible resumption of attacks on ships, blocks or seriously threatens that route, the global economic impact will be immediate and severe. Energy prices spiking, supply chains broken, economies of countries that have nothing to do with this conflict paying the price for a decision made in Washington. France has already called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Emmanuel Macron warned of grave consequences for international peace and security. Oman, which mediated the negotiations, is politically humiliated. And the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, that allowed American bases to operate on their soil are now in the middle of a war that came to them in the form of Iranian missiles. Even within the Republican Party, there are voices of concern. Thomas Massie was clear on the constitutional question, and that matters, not as a procedural footnote, but as an indicator that even Trump's natural allies don't see this operation as simple or obviously justified. What is at stake here is not just Iran. It is the security architecture of an entire region. It is the lives of American soldiers who Trump himself acknowledged may be killed in this operation. It is the stability of the global energy supply. It is the precedent of a war launched by a president without legislative approval. And it is, fundamentally, the question that no presidential address has answered yet. What happens next? If the regime falls, who governs Iran? If it doesn't fall, what comes after? More airstrikes? Troops on the ground? These questions are not pessimism. They are the questions that any responsible government should have answered before the first missile was launched. This may be one of the most decisive weeks of the century. What happens in the coming days in the Middle East will shape the global geopolitical course for decades. If this commentary helped you better understand what's at stake, leave a like. It makes a real difference for the channel. Subscribe so you don't miss any updates. And tell me in the comments, do you think this operation will achieve what Trump promised, or are we looking at yet another war with no clear way out?